Um, Here I'm trying to tell you what others do. So when you read the literature, you don't get shocked by something you have never studied, by other approaches or research designs used by other researchers, and meanwhile guiding you to the menu of what's available for you. So some of what I'm going to be discussing is not really, I'm expecting student at this stage to use all these designs. But at least when you see one, you don't get shocked or claustrophobic as if you have seen a snake or a tiger or something. So what we're doing here is we are trying to understand what's out there, even if we might limit ourselves to 3 or 4 research designs. So just keep in mind that even if the list is long, so many possible research designs, but what you can actually use as a student at this stage of your education, you can only use 5, maximum 6 possible research designs. Okay, I will go through them in my Word document that you will be looking at now. And meanwhile, I will go through some aspects of what's a good research design. Now, actually, we're going deep into the research art or the art of research. Just to have a reference for you, and instead of relying on a written book or something, I'm familiar with the Sacred Heart University, and I highly recommend that you would visit their website to learn from what they have there in terms of methodology. So in a way or another, I just copied and pasted what I found relevant for you guys, and hopefully you will find it useful. Let's be clear first that we have 2 big types of research methods, and you need to be aware of what you are doing as a researcher, as a student doing research. There's something called empirical. Please spend some time understanding what empirical is. Empirical analytical group or group of approaches, they study social sciences and political science as well, in a similar manner that researchers study in natural sciences. What we are trying to do is to observe, to collect what we can call, so I will just add my own notes, collect systematic evidence-based data. Systematic here, it is not your casual observation. It is a systematic process. So eventually, when somebody else does the same study, should come to, I wouldn't say an identical, but at least a similar result. So your own casual observation has a place in research, but cannot be your only method of data collection. That my experience as Mu'taz, a person who lived somewhere for some time, that I found 1, 2, 3, 4. This wouldn't be by itself an empirical analysis. This can be what we'll be calling later interpretive group of approaches. Okay, we need to be systematic so other researchers can find somehow the same evidence, and we would be observable in a way that others can relate to and can collect data, ending up with the same result. Okay, so this type of research focuses on objective research. objective knowledge. What do you mean by objective knowledge? That is not subject to personal biases, okay? Not subject to personal biases, okay? You can come up with an operational definition of variables to be measured. Operational, the word operational is to come up with indicators. Operational here is like using indicators. Remember when we were doing, we're talking about definitions, we said that you might want to have indicators to measure your concept. Okay, I want to measure political participation. How would I measure political participation? You need an operational definition. We will be talking about when we go to quantitative analysis. And this operational definition should should result in indicators. Like what? Like, for instance, people voting, like people participating in informal techniques of political participation, such as, for instance, going in strikes or demonstrations and so on, wherever they are available, in countries that they are available. So we want that so we can measure our variables, okay? The empirical analytical group employs deductive reasoning that uses existing theory as a foundation for a hypothesis that need to be tested. So here we are trying to explain. What do you mean by that? I'm not going to go through it now because we will have a whole session. Next session, we'll be talking about qualitative and quantitative research, and we will see the differences between them. However, the interpretive group, this is the second group of research methods, focus more on understanding the phenomenon in a comprehensive, holistic way. Holistic is like kulli in its totality, okay? In its this is the meaning of the word holistic. This research method allows you to recognize your connection to the subject under study, your connection as a researcher and those whom you are studying. That's why you are going to see some of the research designs available to us would give you, as a researcher, a space to observe and actually to explore or to describe the meaning of certain concepts or terms. Okay, what does it mean to be poor? Okay, you need to go to stay and observe. That's what we call observation by participation. Go and observe how poor people live, what it means for somebody to be poor, how they interpret the political world they live in, how do they see the state, how do they see the elite, how do they see media, political media, how do they see society, how do they see the interpretation, the distribution of wealth in society. How can I do that? You need to be part of the phenomenon you are studying, okay? So poverty here is a very complicated terms and very difficult to write about or to examine while you are at home, or while assuming that you are not poor and you are a middle class person or whatever, high upper class person. So what does it mean to be poor? Of course, you can have your own ideas about it, but to examine it, here you need a more of an interpretive approach where you as a person is going to be part of the phenomenon. And most likely others, if they are in your shoes or if they were in your shoes as a researcher, they might come up with different interpretations. Here it's different from here. You see, in empirical analytical approaches, We are trying to eliminate my role as a researcher, trying to act as if we are physicians. You see, it doesn't matter if it is Dr. X or Dr. Y or Dr. Z who is reading the blood test, they are going to end up with somehow similar results. But when you are in the interpretive group of approaches, you are part of the phenomenon you are examining. So your persona, your biases, your previous understandings, and so on would play a role. So I do not expect two people in interpretive group of approaches to end up with similar or even close approaches. Each one of them can give us different insights. Not necessarily one is right and one is wrong, but they perceived it from a different point of view. And these two different points of view can help me understand what this phenomenon really is. So here we are more into subjective knowledge. You see, you are important as a researcher. Of course, you are important here in empirical analytical approaches as well. But your role here, your biases here are extremely important. That's why it requires careful interpretation of variables, because you are part of it, part of the phenomenon you are trying to explain. You interact with the phenomenon, so you are part of it. In Arabic, just to keep in mind, this is empirical. We do not translate the word empirical. Usually we transliterate it, meaning we use the same terms, like we say democracy, it's in Arabic demokratiya. So we still use the word empirical. Some people call Maidani, so Maidani tahlili, okay? Here it is tafsiri, okay? Tafsiri meaning you are explaining as a researcher. Regardless of all these details, an effectively written methodology section should include the following. You need to introduce the overall methodological approach for investigating your research problem or research question. Is your study qualitative or quantitative or a combination of both? You need to tell me how you're going to be collecting your data. It's going to eventually end up being quantitative, or it's going to end up being qualitative, or you're going to be doing both of them. Can I do both of them? Yes, you can do both of them. What is the unit of analysis of your research? What are you examining? Use your unit of analysis the country as a country, or political parties, that's subsections within a country, or a political class, or a socioeconomic class, or you are using your unit of analysis is the texts, is it newspaper? What are you analyzing? Is it individuals? Like in a questionnaire, you are analyzing individuals. If you are trying to compare the economic performance of certain countries and how this impacted their prospects of democratization, so your unit of analysis is the state as a country. Are you talking about the elite? So the decision-making circle around Trump versus the around circle elite or decision-making circle of decision-making around Obama. So in here you are talking about a group of people, not an individual. Okay. When you are studying, for instance, the relationship between Islam and democracy, is your unit of analysis the text? That is what's written in the Quran about participation, about equality, about justice, about the rule of law, and so on. So the text is your unit of analysis. And then within the text, you're talking about words, or you're talking about verses in the Quran, or sayings of Prophet Muhammad, and so on. Or your unit of analysis is the state itself. You have 53 Muslim countries or countries with Muslim majorities, and that's why you are comparing them to each other. Or comparing Muslim countries to Catholic countries, countries with Catholic majority. So here your unit versus is the state, or you are talking about the individual Muslims versus individual Catholics, or individual Muslims in different states. So here you are talking about your unit versus is the political beliefs of individuals, and so on. Okay, how many cases do you intend to examine in your research? Are you going to do a single case study? Are you going to have a cohort? Are you going to make it comparative between different cases? Are you going to interject variables as a researcher to see the impact of a certain variable on your units of analysis and so on? All of that you have to answer in a way or another. It has to be written somewhere. Indicate how the approach fits the overall research design. Okay, we talked previously about your conceptual framework and your theoretical framework, how they are going to reflect into your research design. In other words, your method should have a clear connection with your research problem. In other words, make sure that your method will actually address the problem. One of the most common deficiencies found in research papers is that the proposed methodology is unsuited to achieving the stated objective of your paper. So I need the research question to be reflected in your conceptual framework and conceptual framework and your theoretical framework, and all that is reflected in your methodology. Okay, so because of your research question that is focusing mainly on individuals, not on the text of the Quran, so your approach is going to be questionnaire and focus group discussions rather than content analysis, because content analysis is you are analyzing the text, but you are not here. Your research problem is not about the text. It's not about the Quran as a book. It is about Muslims as individuals who are influenced by the Quran partly and influenced by their context, socioeconomic and political context. You see, so we need to make sure that your approach to understanding your phenomenon is related to your theoretical framework and your conceptual framework and your research problem and or research question. Okay, in other words, when you are cooking meat, you are not going to treat the meat as if it's fish, right? The fish is cooked in a way that would suit the fish. The same thing, when you are cooking meat, you need to cook it in a way that would suit meat. Okay, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is make sure that all these are connected together and eventually coming up with a solid and consistent approach to understanding the phenomenon at hand. Describe the specific method of data collection you're going to use. Are you going to use surveys, interviews, questionnaires, observation? Are you going to observe? Archival research, secondary data? You're going to go through all the speeches of President Sisi and to understand how he perceives the role of Egypt in the region and in the world. Okay. If you are analyzing existing data, such as data set or archival documents, describe how it was originally created or gathered and by whom. If you have secondary sources and you will be using secondary sources, you need to tell me, okay, XYZ, this person wrote a dissertation about this topic, and he kept collecting this data for a whole year. And this dissertation has been submitted to pursue PhD degree at University X, and I'm going to that he collected. So if you're going to collect your own data, tell me how. If you will be using data collecting by others, meaning secondary sources, you need to tell me as well from where this data emanated, who created or gathered this data, and so on. Of course, when somebody says create a data, it means that you did experimentation, for instance. Okay. Explain how you intend to analyze your results. Will you use statistical analysis? Will you use specific theoretical perspective? Or remember, when we said the theoretical framework, you are going to act as if you were Marx analyzing data. Oh, okay, I'm Marx now. I'm using class analysis. I'm going to see how the state is being used by the economically dominant class to control the bourgeoisie, the peasants, the middle class, and so on. So I'll be Marx while I'm doing this analysis. That's what we call your theoretical framework or theoretical approach. No, I'm going to be Max Weber. Max Weber using Weberian technique, I will be studying the issue of legitimacy in a country like Egypt or Sudan or Saudi Arabia and so on. Okay, I'll be Easton. I'll be using Easton's systems analysis, system analysis, and try to see where the inputs and how the inputs were processed. So eventually we got these outputs. So you need to tell me how you will be analyzing your data, what technique you will be using. If it is statistical analysis, I need to know what it is. You will be using correlation. Are you going to be using OLS, order least square regression? Hopefully, most of you remember we did that when we took the class of quantitative methods. Are you going to do regression to tell me this is the dependent variable and this is the potential independent variable that would explain the change in the dependent variable? You might do that. Or no, I'm going to do it just theoretically, a qualitative approach. I might, and here I will need to say that very quickly and then we'll elaborate on it later on. Even while you are doing qualitative analysis, you might make use of some quantitative indicators. If there is a table that is describing how many acts of violence happened in France by terrorists. Okay, here you're not going to use quantitative technique. It is part of your qualitative technique to examine quantitatively some aspects of your phenomenon, but it's not regression analysis. It is not statistical technique. You are just making reference to quantitative data while you are doing your qualitative analysis. Okay. Provide background and rationale for methodologies that are unfamiliar to your readers. In other words, if you are going to use something that is not widely used in your research, in political science, you need to tell me why you are using this, what it is, why you are using it and not using something that is traditionally used. For instance, when first rational choice model was introduced to political science, early researchers who used rational choice had to explain why they left all what's traditionally used in political science and resorted to a technique coming from economics to understand a political phenomenon. So you need to tell me why this is the case. Traditionally, people use OLS, order least square regression, in social sciences. Okay, why you are going to be using, in case you are using Propet or Topet or Logic. Okay, there are other techniques. You need to tell me why you are doing something different compared to the rest. Okay, so I need to understand why this is the case. Be clear and concise in your explanation of what methodological or what technique or approach you will be using. Provide a rationale for the subject selection and sampling procedure. For instance, if you propose to conduct interviews, how do you intend to select the sample of the population? If you are analyzing texts, which texts have you chosen and why? If you are using statistics, why the set of statistics, being used? If other data sources exist, explain why the data you choose is most appropriate for your research problem and theoretical and conceptual framework. Make sure that it is consistent. Okay, if you are going to play football, you are not going to be dressing in suits, right? You will be, I mean, like classic suit and a tie, and no, you are going there using or dressed in training suit that would be meaningful and convenient while you are doing sports. The same thing. I'm just trying to tell you whatever I'm saying here is not something that is totally new to you. You do that. You are consistent in your everyday life. Like when you are going to swim, you wear your swimming suit. So you don't go to wearing a dress. The same thing when you are examining a phenomenon at the individual level, then you will be using something related to how to extract meaning, how to understand how those individuals think or behave or react. So you will be using, for instance, a questionnaire or focus group discussion or something like that. Okay, so this would mean that you have to tell me what your sample is. You're going to study, for instance, university students. Which university students? Okay, tell me, for instance, my university students are going to be BUE students. Okay, inside BUE, which group? I'm going to be examining how Egyptian university students perceive, for instance, democracy. Okay, which students? Which group of students? Is going to be, you're going to go to political science students, but these students are definitely the minority. The great majority of students at BUE have never taken any course in political science, maybe never even used or misused the word democracy. So be careful what sample you are using, okay? Because if you're talking about political science students, this is an extremely biased sample because it reflects only students who are already familiar with the word democracy. So they are not going to be representative of BUE students. Of course, you need here to enlarge your sample. So be consistent. Whatever sample you will be using has to be related in a consistent way, would reflect in other way your research question and research problem. Okay? And so on. Address potential limitations as well in your methodology. You need to be open about that. Nobody is expecting you to write a piece of research that is going to stop research. Okay, I'm done. We finished. I wrote something that nobody else is going to examine this topic again because I'm great. I did everything possible in this piece of research, so no research is going to be done after me. Of course not. All our pieces of research, whether dissertation, thesis, projects, are one block in a huge wall called science. So you need to tell me what I studied does not speak for others. Okay, I'm studying students of BUE. Are they representatives of all university students or no? They are representative of whom? Maybe middle class in a way or another. So you need to show me your empirical evidence. What is the income mostly of those students at the income of the families of students study at BUE and compare it to the general population. Are they the same like students from University of Bani Suef, University of Asyut or Sohag, or there are differences in socioeconomic classes that might be reflected, or even in the environment they live in, the subculture that they live in. So you can tell me, whatever I'm doing is not representative of everybody. It is very limited. It is illustrative. I cannot study all Egyptian university students. I can study those of BUE for, and I can justify my choice for practical reasons and scientific reasons. And we'll talk about that later on. How will you attempt to control for potential confounding variables and errors? Of course, usually, when we think in terms of selecting data for our research, there could be other variables that we did not examine. For instance, you forgot or you did not examine or ask your subjects in your questionnaire about a specific issue, a specific point. So here you might say, this piece of research lacks this question, or this question couldn't be asked in my questionnaire because students feared to answer this question, this specific question. To what extent you support the government of President Sisi in Egypt? Okay, so this is a sensitive question, politically sensitive questions, and most students didn't, or most subject did not respond to this question. So tell me that it happened. Or I forgot to ask about something, whether they are religion for Muslims or Christians. For instance, you forgot, this is an error. You need to tell me, you see, because if you do not tell me, and I found it out, then I'm gonna say, oh, there is a big issue here. But when you say it, then that's much better. If your methodology may lead to problems, you can anticipate, state that this openly and show why pursuing this methodology outweighs the risk of these problems cropping up. In other words, you tell me, I'm not going to do questionnaire. I'm going to do observation by participation. I'm going to sit down with my colleagues and open up political issues and somehow observe how they perceive government in Egypt, with democracy in Egypt, and so on. I'm not gonna, yes, I understand, you can say that, I understand this is not a systematic way, but there is no other systematic way to do that, and explain to me why you found that systematic ways like questionnaires or surveys or focus group discussions failed or could potentially fail or could lead to biased results and so on, and you resorted to another exploratory approach rather than empirical analytical approach like questionnaires and so on. Okay. Of course, this you can eat all these notes, they are important. But here I'm going to the research designs. We have so many research designs. Of course, guys, we are in social sciences. We have so many techniques to do data connection and data analysis and so on. What I'll be doing right now is not a menu for you that you have to stick to, but I need you to be aware of the fact that this is a very rich field and it is highly related and learn a lot. We as political science students, we learned a lot from other fields. That's why you might run into research done by others in your literature review, and you find somebody using case study design. What's case study? Or somebody using something called causal design. What's causal design? Or somebody using cross-sectional design, and you say, what is this? What does it mean? Or descriptive design. Or you yourself can say, I'm going to use this exploratory design. I'm going to use cohort design. Very difficult in our case, but in general, you need not to get claustrophobic, feeling that paranoid. Say, oh, why does it know? Oh, experimental design, I know what it is. I'm not going to use it in my research. But when I read a piece of literature that used it, at least I need to know what it is. You see, exactly like when you guys take a class with quantitative methods, and then you find somebody using regression analysis. You don't have to do regression analysis in all your pieces of research, but at least when you see a table of regression, you can understand what it is, why they're using 2 stars, 3 stars, 1 star, and what does it indicate, what's margin of error, what's t-test, what's chi-square, you see, you need to know them even if you are not going to be using them. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here, which is to show you 12 different techniques or approaches or designs that we in political science we use, either mainly importing from other pieces of research. That's a very common research design, which is a case study design. It is an in-depth study of a particular research problem rather than a sweeping statistical survey. So I'm going, because Osama bin Laden is so important, Osama bin Laden is my case study. I'm not going to study all terrorists. I'm not going to study like 500 cases or 15 or 5. No, I'm going to focus on one person, Osama bin Laden. All my analysis is going to be Osama bin Laden. That's case study. Okay, and instead of studying all African countries, I'm going to study Nigeria. That's it, only Nigeria. Or actually, okay, just be careful. When I said Osama bin Laden, what's your unit of analysis? This is the individual Osama bin Laden, right? If you are going to study his speeches, or your technique is his speeches, so your unit of analysis is his speeches. Maybe in these speeches you are not studying everything, but you are studying only, for instance, religion-related speeches. So here even it's narrower. Okay, when you say a case study, I'll be studying, for instance, an international organization like NATO. This is my case study. That's it. My case study is NATO. How it was formed, why it was formed, what the challenges are, what the future is, and so on. So this is a case study, deep case study. Okay, instead of trying to studying all international organizations and international coalitions and so on, you're going to focus on one of them. You need to justify for me, of course, when you are doing that, and why you are choosing this case study. Okay. This approach excels at bringing us to understanding of a complex issue through detailed contextual analysis of a limited number of events or conditions and their relationships. Some of these designs I'll spend more time understanding just because they are relevant to us, and you guys will be most likely using cases like that. So I will focus on some more than others. Okay, so yes, it is understanding a complex issue. Osama bin Laden is a very important person. I need to understand why. NATO is an extremely important coalition. I'm going to spend time on it. And of course, if somebody say, oh no, I'm going to study Ahmed Mohammed. Who is Ahmed Mohammed? One of the terrorists somewhere in whatever, Morocco. Okay, why is he relevant? I don't know. I just like to study this guy. No, you need to convince me why Ahmed Mohammed is an important case study. Okay, a researcher using a case study design can apply a variety of methodologies and rely on a variety of sources to investigate a research problem. Here, meaning a case study does not mean that you are limited. Actually, no, I'll be using, maybe I can use quantitative analysis. Even I can count how many times he used verses from the Quran to justify his approach towards his victims, as Osama bin Laden. You might do content analysis. Beside that, you might do psychological analysis. You see, you might resort to people who were around him and how they interacted with him, what did he say to them, and so on, memoirs of others. Okay, so using a case study does not mean that it's easier than comparative, for instance, or longitudinal. No, actually it can, because you need to go deep in understanding your case study. Then you might use so many methodological techniques to understand your case study. Design can extend experience or add strength to what's already known through previous research. We already have theories about why people resort to violence using religious justifications. Already have that. Okay, so your piece of research can eventually tell us, you know what we already know is right, or is partially right. No, Osama bin Laden does not fit the profile, that's your findings, does not fit the traditional profile of a terrorist for religious purposes, okay, based on your research review. So you have done a research review and came up with certain characteristics of what a terrorist look like, and eventually found, actually, no, Osama bin Laden is not. He's not a poor guy. He's not ill-educated guy. Okay, so the profile of a terrorist that is usually poor person, brainwashed person, has been alienated from society, has psychological issues and so on, does not fit that. So here you are, in a way, shedding some doubt on what has become like a law-like generalization in our study. No, what previous research is not accurate. That's one of your findings. So you can extend experience or add strength to what is already known there, or you can shed some doubt on what's already known. Social sciences in particular make wide use of research design to examine contemporary real-life situations and provide the basis for the application of concepts and theories and extension of methods. Yes, we do that as students. We can find, okay, I'm going to study the Renaissance Dam. That's it, Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia. This is going to be when Ethiopia studied this issue. Why? This is the only issue I'm interested in. You can, while using this case study, you can use historical design as well. Say, I'm going to see this history of the thing. What happened? What led to that? How many times leaders in Ethiopia talked about building a dam on the Blue Nile, and so on. The design can provide detailed description of specific and rare cases. Yes, that's important. We are interested in understanding something as important as Hitler. Hitler is a very important person. Or China. China is a very important. This can be your case study. Why China is China? Why has achieved this? Why is it like next one of the newly industrialized countries while it is democratically still very agrarian society that is run by a dictator? Okay, so yes, that's a rare case where you have high economic level or economic development levels and poor democratic performance. What these studies do not tell you, that's something to keep in mind. A single or a small number of cases offers little basis for establishing reliability or to generalize the findings to wider population of people, places, or things. When you study Osama bin Laden, it is Osama bin Laden. You cannot simply say all terrorists are. No. Be careful. You do not study all terrorists or a group of terrorists. Actually, you studied one. And some of his people associated with him so end up being 3 or 4 or 5. But you cannot tell me that you have studied everybody. Nope. You cannot claim that. You cannot generalize. Your discussion is limited to the case study you studied. You cannot have studying a civil war somewhere, you cannot generalize about all civil wars. No, it's one case. You might relate your findings about this case with what other researchers found in other cases. To say actually X, Y, and Z, this group of researchers were right, and I found similar results in my piece of research regarding causes of civil war and ramifications of civil war. But you cannot claim by yourself saying, oh, I studied the civil war in Syria, so this means all civil wars happened for the following reasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, drawing only from the Syrian experience. Okay. The intense exposure to study of the case may be biased or may bias a researcher's interpretation of the findings. Yes, you're so familiar with the Chinese politics or an economy, political economy of China, to the extent that you measure every possible phenomenon or phenomena that happened elsewhere as if it is a replica of what happened in China. No, China is a context that is different by itself. Studying Hitler does not mean you can generalize about Trump. Yes, Trump might not be the traditional liberal democratic guy, but definitely we have not seen him taking decisions like Hitler. Maybe this is for institutional reasons. But not because you studied Hitler, then you can simply say, and this means that all rulers of the world are some kind of war lovers and blood suckers like Hitler, right? Design does not facilitate assessment of cause and effect relationship, which is another important thing. It's highly unlikely you can come up with a causal relationship, meaning X led to Y, in the form of a theory or something related to a theory. Why? Because it's just one case study. Think about it in terms of medicine. Oh, this guy got this kind of disease because he ate this kind of food. Yeah, but that's one person. Maybe other people ate the same kind of food but did not get the disease, right? So here, you just need to limit your ambitions regarding coming up with a causal relationship. Vital information might be missing, making the case hard to interpret, which is another important thing. When you have one case study, are you sure that you can have all the relevant information about it? Or actually, no, it is not enough information, but still very important. So we need to understand what's happening, even if I do not have all the interpretation, all the information. So here you are going to end up having what we call exploratory design along with case study design. Can I have both? Yes, of course. This is what we call integration of approaches. More than one approach to understand your phenomenon. The case may not be representative or typical of a larger problem being investigated, so be careful. You cannot generalize about all Arabs by studying Oman. You cannot generalize about all Arab countries by studying Sudan. You see, you cannot generalize about all Arab leaders by studying Nasser, right? If the criteria for selecting a case is because it represents a very unusual or unique phenomenon or problem for study, then your interpretation of the findings can only apply to this particular case. Yes, definitely Osama bin Laden is unique. Hitler is unique. So you cannot generalize from one person being that unique to say all German leaders are 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we cannot say that. You cannot say all American presidents are like Trump. No, you cannot say that. Okay. We have another design that we call causal design. Here we are more empiricist. By the way, you can use, again, integrate case study design along with a causal design. What's causal design? You are trying to understand the relationship between X and Y. Okay. Islam and democracy, being oil-producing country and democracy, being a multi or an ideologically polarized country and stability, dictatorship and economic development. If X, then yes. So if X happened, then Y happened. This type of research is used to measure what impact a specific change will have on existing norms and assumptions. Most social sciences seek causal explanations that reflect tests of hypotheses. There are the hypothesis that says, if we have a strong middle class, so we're going to have a stable democracy. Or if it is not democracy by itself, we're going to have calls for democracy. Okay? So we need to see if this happens. So what is a middle class? What is a strong middle class? How to measure it? And what's demands for democracy? How to measure it? And so on. Causal effect occurs when variation in one phenomenon, an independent variable, leads to a result on average in variation on another phenomenon and dependent variable. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you want to examine the impact of strong middle class, of having a strong middle class on demands of democratization, to show me variable X changing and variable Y changing with it. Show me, for instance, when there was South Korea, when the middle class was weak, what happened to calls for democracy? And then X, that is middle class, became stronger, so the demands for democracy became stronger. And when the middle class became very strong, the calls for democracy became stronger and stronger. I need to see the change. X, when it took the value 1, Y became 1. X took 2, Y took 2. X took 3, Y took 3. Okay? I need to see that. If you cannot show me how the change in X led to the change in Y, then it is not a causal relation. Then it is not a causal. Can be anything else. Can be anything. Can be just an association, but not, can be accidental. It is not really related to the Middle East. I'm sorry, to the middle class, I'm sorry. It is related to the norms and the beliefs of the elite. Okay, if this is the case, show me how when the change in the beliefs of the elite changed, for instance, from Nasser to Sadat to Mubarak to Sisi, the prospects of democratization changed. If he can show me if X changes, then Y changes, then it is a causal design. Okay? Conditions necessary for determining causality. Causality is not an easy thing because you are on the brink of a theory. If really X causes Y, and you have shown that, then there is a causality. But we need to make sure that we have conditions for this causality to actually happen. You need to show me the empirical association. A valid conclusion is based on finding an association between the independent variable and the dependent variable. As I said, X changed, so Y changed. Appropriate time order to conclude that causation was involved. One must see that cases were exposed to variation in the independent variable before variation in the dependent variable. Don't show me, if you show me that actually Y changed first and then X changed, that the democratization process happened first and then the middle class became stronger. No. This is not what you're saying. What you're saying is that X caused Y. If I can see by evidence that Y caused X, then there is no causality, or this causality is the other way around. It is not true that strong middle class would lead to demands for democracy. Actually, when South Korea democratized, the middle class became stronger. If this is the case, then it is not X caused Y, it's Y caused X. So do not confuse the cause and the effect. I need to see that this happened before this. This has become a stronger middle class due to economic development, due to education, to number of university students, to number of employees in private sector, not government employees. When this happened, then later on, these exact people, asked for more democracy. Then X preceded Y. X happened before Y. Non-spuriousness. What do you mean by non-spuriousness? A relationship between two variables that is not due to variation in a third variable. You cannot tell me that when birds go out in the sky, people buy ice cream more. Oh, the more birds are in the sky, the more people buy ice cream. Why? Because the birds encourage people to lick ice cream. Oh, so you are trying to tell me if more birds are in the sky, then more ice cream sales will happen. This is the independent and this is the dependent. Unfortunately, I can debunk your conclusion. Your conclusion is not accurate. Why? Because this is a spurious relationship. Spurious means fake relationship. It looks as if there is a relationship between the number of birds in the sky and the sales of ice cream. But actually, this is not causing this. X and Y here, in this case, both of them are dependent on an actual independent variable that is not X or Y. It is Z. If Z, then X and Y, which is the temperature, the sun. When the sun rises and it becomes hot, the temperature is high, so the birds go out flying, enjoying the sun. And meanwhile, people consume more ice cream. So it is not a relationship between this and that, between X and Y. Actually, if X is the sun or the temperature, then I have two Y's, Y1, a dependent variable 1, which is the number of birds in the sky, and Y2, which is the sales of ice cream. X meaning temperature, when it rises, then two dependent variables happen or take place because of X. So do not tell me that middle class, strong middle class yield for more democratic demands or calls for democracy. It might be something third, that this larger economic, larger middle class and more calls for democracy are both of them the impact of globalization. Yes, the temperature. So middle class by itself, this is not true, by the way. Globalization, what I'm saying is not accurate. I'm just giving you an example. So stronger middle class really leads to more demands of democracy. But you need to tell me that this dependent variable, this independent variable, which is larger middle class, stronger middle class, is not because of globalization that led to both X and Y, which is larger middle class and more demands for democracy. In other words, I need to make sure that really this is the case. This is the case. X led to Y. No spurious relationship. If it's a spurious relationship, then this independent variable is not the real cause. There is another cause that is not real. Exactly when you go to a restaurant, and it's like 5 or 6 of you, and all of you eat soup, eat meat, except for one. One did not eat meat, eat fish. All of you get sick, including the guy who ate fish. You cannot tell me that all of you got sick because of meat, because there is a guy who did not eat meat. He ate fish. So most likely all these people got sick because of the soup, because everybody got soup, right? Not the meat, because there is one already did not get the meat. So you need to come up with a research design showing me different cases, maybe, or one case if you can, to show me that when you have a stronger middle class, then you have more calls for democracy that would eventually raise the pressure on the dictatorial elite to become a democracy. Okay? What do these studies tell you? Causality research designs help researchers understand why the world works the way they are, why certain countries are more democratic than other countries, through the process of proving a causal link between variables and eliminating other possibilities. You see, I have to be honest with you guys. I'm at this level. I would not expect you to be that savvy, that clever at eliminating other possibilities. But at least I need a solid evidence for proving the causal link. Okay, and some kind of discussion of other possibilities that you are excluding. You see, saying this cannot be because of globalization, this cannot be because of other variables. Okay. Replication is possible. Replication meaning if Mu'taz decides to replicate something that was done by Ahmed, yes, I can do that. Why? Because theoretically, I can collect more data about independent variable and the dependent variable and see if it works. Okay, you guys studied it in South Korea. I'm going to study here in Brazil. Okay. There is a greater confidence that the study has internal validity. I'm not going to go through this part because that's going to take us in another discussion. What these studies do not tell you, not all relationships are causal. That's important. The possibility always exists that by sheer coincidence, two unrelated events appear to be related. Example, the sun does not rise because of the rooster singing. Okay, the rooster sing, right? Right. Does it mean that it gave the sign that the sun go up? No. You see, these are not necessarily related in the sense that one of them is causing the other. I know roosters, and most of you guys who can rooster can sing whatever this noise that they make any time of the day. Yes, it's usually the case that they do that with the sun, but they might do that against a stranger. Okay, a rooster can be defending itself, defending other chicken, and just making the same noise it makes while the sun is rising. Okay. Conclusions about causal relationships are difficult to determine due to a variety of extraneous and confounding variables that exist in social environment. This means causality can only be inferred, never proven. Very difficult, yes. What part of this is when we generalize about a phenomenon or a causal relationship between middle class, strong middle class, and democratization cannot emanate from one study. You see, it has to be studied by different researchers and in different contexts. So to eventually say it's almost like a law, it's almost like a proven theory that when you have a strong middle, independent, educated class, you would eventually end up having calls for democracy that would eventually lead to become democracy. It is not true that the amount of losses in fires is the outcome of the number of firemen we send to put fire out. Imagine if I tell you this interesting. I'm gonna highlight these examples for you so you guys, because the examples will show you would clarify for you the meaning. Okay, it doesn't want me here. Sorry, I'm wasting your time. Okay. This mouse doesn't like me. Okay, so underlined and he's capitalized. Okay, for instance, when we send five people of firemen to put out a fire, we found that the losses are like 5,000 pounds. When we send 15 firemen, we found that the losses are like 2 million pounds. When we send 70 firemen, we end up finding that the losses are like 500 million pounds. So sending more firemen would mean that more losses we have. Oh, so next time when there's a fire, don't send any firemen? Of course, that's a wrong analysis. Why? Because there is another thing that has not been done, has not been included in the model, which is the size of the fire. The size of the fire makes the losses more if it is a huge fire, and makes us send more firemen. So actually both of them are dependent on the size of the fire. The size of the fire is the independent variable. The two dependent variables are the amount of losses and the number of firemen we send to put the fire out. So it's more like the sun and its relationship with the birds and the sales of ice cream. So if there is a third variable that you have not included in your analysis, you might end up making a lot of effort to prove that two things are related, but actually there could be something else that you have not studied. That's where it's very important for you to use your conceptual framework and theoretical framework, because it limits the possibilities. You see, even when you are within the Marxist tradition or Weberian tradition or liberal tradition or statist tradition or studying Hobbesian philosophy, these people are trying to tell you the relationship between X and Y is as follows, right? So that's why as a researcher, you need to have these theoretical and conceptual frameworks so you do not get astray or misled by your own personal observations. No, you need to have some kind of guidance to tell you what variables are possibly related as dependent and independent. A third model is called cross-sectional design. Cross-sectional research does have three distinctive features: no time dimension, a reliance on existing differences rather than change following intervention, and groups are selected both in existing differences as random allocation. This is what we used to call comparative approach or design, comparative approach or design. So cross-sectional design or cross-cases design, comparative, maybe cross-cases, or cross-cases, or comparative approach. So what is the purpose of this? It is here you are trying to examine the differences between different cases. So you are trying to say something like, I'm going to compare Nasser to Sadat in their approach to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Okay, fine. For what reason? You are trying to see that how the change in leadership perceptions, personal beliefs, system of ideas, and so on, would change the foreign policy of a country. Okay. How I'm going to examine the difference between George W. Bush, conservative, and Trump, conservative, and see the impact of leadership, foreign policy, towards the Arab-Israeli conflict, for instance, or towards NATO, or towards China, whatever. Okay, so it's a comparative approach. 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. That's we usually call it small n comparison. Small n meaning number of cases. So it's 2 cases, 3 cases, and so on. No time dimension, you can compare Nasser with Saddam, right? You can compare Hitler with Mussolini. You can compare Stalin to Mao Zedong. You can compare the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait with the American invasion of Afghanistan. You don't have real constraints except for you need to tell me how this is related to your research question. You can compare people, you can compare events, you can compare states, you can compare impact of globalization on Japan versus South Korea, or Cuba versus North Korea. All what I expect from you is that you need to tell me how this is related to your research problem or research question. However, never ever claim that you can prove or make causal inference, as it says here. Why? Because we can be deceived. You can be deceived. I'm going to show you an example. You can easily deceive us, especially if you are selecting on the dependent variable, meaning selecting on similar dependent variables. You might say, okay, I'm going to examine the causes of civil wars. I will compare 3 cases: Syria, Yemen, Libya. Okay. And you might eventually say, oh, what are the similarities between the three countries? The three countries are majority Muslim, so Islam causes civil wars. No, that's why you cannot come up with causality based on cross-sectional design or comparative design. You can claim the possibility of causality. It could be a causality, but you cannot. Why? You need to determine causality to come up with a large N, which is something what I'll discuss in a minute. Because if you just include another case that is not Muslim country and has civil war, you will find that, oh, okay, so it is not necessarily Islam. You see, like for instance, civil war in Cote d'Ivoire, civil war in Togo, civil war in Congo. Oh, so just by including a case, a different case, you end up finding that your causality, your presumed causality, is not accurate. So when you can, it's totally up to you, the cases that you want to compare. But one thing to keep in mind, never claim causality based on this comparison. Why? Because you might end up with long causality, wrong relationship between independent and dependent variable. Okay? You can suggest that there can be something related to a specific type of culture, parochial culture, or culture that emphasizes identity to cause that, including Islam, Christianity, whatever religions, that is used or misused or overused by political elites. So this creates identity crisis that would eventually lead to the possibility of a civil war, but not necessarily Islam, because we know that there are other cases. Spain had a civil war in 1930s, and definitely Spain is not a Muslim country. It was not, I mean, long time ago it was a Muslim country, but again, you cannot attribute that this civil war in 1930s was because of Islam. China had a civil war. So many countries, USA had a civil war, right? And Islam is not related to it. So just be careful when you do that, when you do cross-sectional or comparative studies, not to assume causality, unwarranted causality, or unscientifically justifiable causality. I would encourage you guys to read all that. Studies tell you and so on. These are like, because I need to go through so many cases to come. Descriptive design. Descriptive research design helps you provide answers to the question of who. Just you are describing who, what, when, where, and how. You see, just why we resort to the descriptive study. We don't know much about a phenomenon, or a phenomenon is so deep that we need in this study just to understand what it is. What is this thing called globalization? That's it. This is the maximum I can achieve at the moment. I cannot go beyond that. You see, when globalization first started in late 1990s, nobody really understood what this term means. Awlama, what's that? Okay. Then we needed some researchers just to describe for us what it is. Who's behind it? What is, like, is there a theory behind it? Is there some kind of theoretical framework that can explain it for us? Why do we talk about it that much? Okay, so sometimes your phenomenon is so unclear that all you have to do is just to describe it. All the effort you're doing is to understand. Somebody is saying that this is the end of time, end of history, like Fukuyama's book, end of history. So what it is, end of history? What do you mean by that? He has been using Hegelian approach. So what is this Hegelian approach saying? Okay, Hegel said that for what purposes? Okay, so we just need to understand what it is, and that's it. So just a matter of description, philosophical description of Hegelian approach to history, to understanding history, and how Fukuyama used it to say that with the breakdown of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, we now have the end of history. So just a description of what it is doing, and so on. Okay, now there is a war somewhere in Ethiopia between the Tigray ethnic group and the Oromian and the Ethiopian, and we understand very little about that. Okay, we need somebody to explain that to us, not to explain, so to describe that to us, just to describe it to us. But just be careful, students, here, because I need to tell you that knowing little about a phenomenon is not you as a student knowing little about a phenomenon. It's not because you do not understand Iraq well or Iraqi politics well, you end up saying, I'm going to come a descriptive analysis of, descriptive design approach to the Iraqi phenomenon. No, Iraq is known for students of political, for us as researchers of political science. Okay, so you cannot just claim that I'm going to do the descriptive approach to this. No, because Iraqi politics is totally understood for most of us. When we say describe a phenomenon, this is a phenomenon that is not understood to people who work in political science. Okay, not to you as a student. Okay, Mexico is understood. Mexican politics is understood to students of political science everywhere. You don't understand it, then you need to learn about it. But don't tell me that I'm going to adopt a descriptive design to understand the Mexican political system or something happening in a phenomenon of interest within the context of the Mexican political system. There is something related to descriptive design is exploratory design. When there is no studies about it at all, that's very close to the descriptive stuff. You are trying to understand what it is, okay? Because it is not clear for us what it is. Most people prefer to use the word exploratory design than descriptive design. I just put them just beside each other, but they are basically trying to demystify something that is not understood for us. So somebody might just travel to a place and eventually explain to us what's happening then. Again, not explaining, exploring, giving us a well-grounded picture of the situation being developed. We want to understand. Gives us. They can tell us, okay, now I demystified it. We can develop more research in the future, okay, and so on. Again, please read all these pros and cons of each one of these designs. The sixth design is called cohort design. This is something that we usually in political science do not do, except in one area, which is political psychology. Usually used in medical, as I said, often used in medical sciences, but often in applied social sciences. A cohort study referred to a study conducted over a period of time involving members of population which the subject or representative member comes from and who are united by some commonality or similarity. Using usually a quantitative framework, we examine how something changes. Like, of course, usually, guys, you are not going to do that in your research, but at least when you see it, don't get like stunned. Something, oh, what is it? No, just like if for instance, if you take a group of people and for 6 months in a camp somewhere, and these people, you are going to monitor how they evolve, how they change, especially if they are people of a certain interest, refugees, people who are coming, like for instance, Palestinian refugees, and these Palestinian refugees, how they perceive Israel, how they perceive the peace of Israel. Okay, I'm going to take these people, for instance, and see how they are going to interact with Israeli youth. So now you have a group of Israeli youth along with a group of Palestinian youth, and they are going to interact with each other. And here it's a cohort design. You're going to see how the occupied and the occupier sort of are going to interact with each other. Okay, usually we do that when we are trying to see how a phenomenon is evolving. الظاهرة بتتغير. Okay, before our eyes, we are monitoring how they are going to agree, disagree. They might have struggles, they might have fights, they might have consensus, they might come up with a compromise, and so on. Okay. Experimental design, which is, again, I put it after the cohort design because they are very much related. Here you intervene. Okay, I'm going to show you a blueprint of the procedure that enables the researcher to maintain control over all factors that may affect the result of an experiment. In doing so, the researcher attempts to determine or predict what might occur. Is often used where there is time priority in a causal relationship, cause effect, and there is consistency in a causal relationship. A cause will always lead to the same effect, and the magnitude of the correlation is great. What I mean by that, the independent variable is administered to experimental group and not to the control group. This is the keyword. Okay, I want to say to what extent these people of anti-Egyptian government voices of dissent or opposition in Turkey and in Qatar, to what extent they are influential in in changing people's minds about the Sisi regime. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a group of students, let's say 30 students. I will show them some of these negative things being said about President Sisi and his approach to politics and so on. And I will keep giving them these negative things. You see, let's say for a week, each day I will take them in a session for like 30 minutes, showing them negative things coming from Turkey, TV shows, talk shows that are extremely critical of President Sisi. While the other group, okay, like these are 20 people, these 20 people here, the 20 are 10 girls and 10 boys, and these are 10 girls and 10 boys. All of them are students of BUE or of Cairo University or whatever, okay? I'm going to show the group A these negative things about President Sisi coming from Turkey, dissent groups, media groups, okay? And the other group, I'm not going to show them anything. And then I'm going to measure the attitudes of those students who were exposed to these negative messages, negative media signals, in comparison with others. Here, if there is an actual change after a week, then I can attribute that actually these people in Turkey who are sending all these negative messages are effective. Because the first group that has been introduced, this is the experimental group that has been introduced to these media negativities, actually ended up being more negative of President Sisi's regime. Or the other way around, which is say that actually I didn't see any impact. The two groups' attitudes toward President Sisi's approach to politics are the same. No much difference between those groups that were exposed and the experimental group and the control group. Of course, again, you might not do that in your research at this level, but when you see it in the literature, don't panic. Another approach that we call historical design, which is the purpose of the historical research design is to collect, verify, and synthesize evidence from the past to establish facts that defend or refute your hypothesis. Here you are trying to examine a phenomenon, saying something like something related to why Arabs or let's say why Egyptians have this negative attitude toward Israel throughout time. Here you might want to think, I'm going to be examining since Israel's inception, like 1948. This was during King Farouk's reign or era, and then Muhammad Naguib, and then Nasser, and then Sadat, and then Mubarak, and so on. Okay? So here you are going to go through all the historical evidence to understand what happened. Here you use secondary sources and variety of primary documentary evidence. Secondary sources mean you can see what documentation, how Egyptians, how the Egyptian government decided to launch a war against Israel in 1948. What evidence we have, documents, what diaries, what logs, what official records, what reports, what archives, and non-textual information, what maps we have, what pictures, what audio and visual recordings. All this is going to be part of your historical analysis, as if you are studying the history of the phenomenon from A, B to C, and so on. Just be careful one thing. If you are going to study this phenomenon from, let's say, 1948 through 1973, you can do that. You can choose the period or the time span that is suitable for your research question, but you cannot select within the selection. In other words, you cannot just simply say, I'm going to study from 1948 through 1965 and stop there, and then study from 1965 through 1967. No, why did you skip a part? You cannot select within the selection. If you're going to study history, then study all history. You cannot simply pick and choose. You are not a lawyer picking up certain events to end up defending a certain predetermined result. No, you give me all the evidence coming from this historical period. I need to see all the evidence coming from this period from A to Z. Okay? So don't select within the historical period you are examining. Okay. Longitudinal design. This is, you can call this is the qualitative design of time, and this is the quantitative. A longitudinal study follows the same sample over time and makes repeated observations, like survey, but you are doing survey at different points of time. For example, the same group of people is interviewed at regular intervals, enabling researchers to track changes over time and to relate them to variables that might explain why that changes occur. I will not go through all that, but for instance, let's assume that nowadays we have been somebody, for whatever reason, was lucky that he already studied the relationship or how Israeli and UAE university students perceived each other. And then this peace accord, peace treaty between UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Israel occurred. So here you can measure what happened before and what happened after. Okay, somebody might say, but this looks like it is like the experimental design. No, the experimental design, you introduce a new variable. You as a researcher have no control over when this peace treaty happened. Right? You did not introduce the media coming from the Egyptian descent or opposition Muslim Brotherhood figures in Turkey to the Egyptian students. No experimentation here. It is just, it's happening over 2 or more distinct time periods. Okay? Again, this is not necessarily something that you guys can do in your design because of the limitation of the time. But if somebody is doing like a PhD dissertation or an extended study of some sort, this can be used. But again, if you see it in the literature, don't panic. Observational design draws a conclusion by comparing subjects against a control group in cases where the researcher has no control over in the experiment. I wouldn't go through the details of that because this is really too detailed, and usually we don't do that much. But one thing to keep in mind that you can do observational design without these details. You can observe the phenomenon, you can be part of the phenomenon, which I will be calling later on observation by participation, which is to observe. This is when we talk about more how you collect your data, but this is not, I'm not talking about how to collect your data now. We have a philosophical design, and those for people who study political philosophy, political theory. So the here more their unit of analysis is not really an empirical evidence. It is more like the ideas. You are grappling with ideas itself, with the argumentation. How different researchers, different even philosophers approached certain phenomena. Like for instance, you can claim or you can say that Hobbes or Hobbesian analysis is adopted by most security apparatus in the world. Hobbes defending the state, defending its existence, obeying the sovereign, despising variety of opinions and pluralism, acting with a revolution as necessarily negative war against the sovereign, and so on. Okay, if my research is related to how state apparatus, intelligence communities throughout the world deal with the state, how they understand it. Okay, so here this is a philosophical design in the sense that you are using the tools of argumentation derived from philosophical traditions, concepts, models, and theories to critically explore and challenge, for example, the relevance of a logic and evidence in academic debates, or to analyze arguments about fundamental issues, or to discuss the root of existing discourse about a research problem. Okay? One way, or we have three ways to do that. Definitely, I'm not going to expect you at this level to do that, but at least when you see these words, don't panic again. You can do the ontological analysis. Ontology means the study that describes the nature of reality, what's real and what's not, what's fundamental and what is derivative in reality. Okay, is the state a reflection of authority, or it is a creation of authority? Is a social contract really something that can explain for us why revolutions happened, and revolutions might not happen in other cases? Is there something called a social contract? Why people do not rebel in some cases, and why do they rebel in other cases? Is it related to social theory thing that it was preached, was not respected by the different players? There's something as well called epistemology. This is another part of your philosophical analysis, which is the nature of knowledge. From where Muslims get their knowledge about the world that they live in. Is it mainly science? Is it mainly religion? Is it religion meaning the Quran? Or it is the sayings of those who interpret the Quran, calling fuqaha, du'a, mashayikh, and so on? Who is more important for Muslims nowadays? Like, is it mashayikh, like al-Sha'rawi, like du'a, like Mustafa Husni, and so on? or the thick books of Ibn Kathir or Tabari or Ibn Hajar and so on. So from where Muslims actually get their understanding of the relationship between Islam and politics. Okay. We have another thing or another approach within the philosophical approach called axiology, which is the study of values. What do people, how come that some countries or some cultures would accept the tradition of dictator, but Nasser was dictator, but he was 1, 2, 3, 4, justifying for him to be a dictator. How come that, why certain cultures do not? You cannot, in the US, for instance, say, oh, Trump is a dictator, but, because most people say, no, I don't want a dictator too. How come that Muhammad Abdu, for instance, said something that إنما ينهض بالشرق مستبد عادل. The East would rise, of course, meaning most Muslim societies, would rise up, would develop, would progress by a just dictator, a just despot. Can we have a just despot? From where came these concepts? So in axiology, you are trying to examine the values or a group of that an individual or a group of people find. Is Muhammad Abdu coming from an Islamic tradition or a non-Islamic tradition? Here you are not going to do a survey or a questionnaire. You are just within the books, reading, relating X to Y and Y to Z and so on. And please read or go through all these details. Where is this? Yes, sequential design. That's it's like a stage. We usually don't do that in social sciences, and to be honest, in political science, but it's there just in case you guys run into it. So all these are our designs. You might use historical analysis. Usually the ones that are usually used in social sciences and mainly in political science would be one case study, the first one. Somebody is trying case study design along with causal relationship and trying to see causality between X and Y according to this condition. You might use a comparative design, comparative approach, comparing more than one. And if you will be using large N, that's later on when we go to the quantitative research. Some people use, in political science, use exploratory or descriptive. Actually, I mean, I can combine descriptive design along with exploratory design. Cohort design, rarely used. Experimental design, widely used by behavior political science, but this is not something that we do in Egypt in general. Historical design, widely used. Longitudinal design, yeah, be used, but this requires people who know how to do cross-sectional statistical analysis, because you're going to have lots of data coming from almost like a table with data in different direction. Observational design, you can do that if you are going to assess the impact of a variable on a group of respondents in a given way. Then philosophical design, widely used by people who study political philosophy and political thought. Sequential design, rarely used. Hopefully this was useful to you guys. Hopefully you got the idea. You don't have to use all those. All what I want you to do is focus on how to effectively write the methodology section. Pick the designs that would be consistent with your research question, conceptual framework, and theoretical framework. And best of luck.